Hello, welcome. Alan here with Discovering Buddhism, beaming to you from Vajrayana Institute. So we have a couple of people online, but so far no live people. No one has actually arrived, which doesn't matter because luckily we have someone might have just arrived. Hi, come in. How are you?
Hi, good, thank you. How are you?
Good. You've been before?
To the centre I have, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But not to Discovering Buddhism.
Take it off?
Yeah, we don't need it.
Is it okay?
Apparently.
Yeah. All right, okay.
What's your name again?
Heather.
Heather. Oh,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I think someone said you contacted during the week.
No, I don't think that was me.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right. I'm Alan.
Hi, nice
Hi.
to meet you.
So I'm sort of teaching in two modes. So you're there, and I've just gone online. So I've got two people online.
Okay.
So
Am I all right here?
you're fine there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and for people online, Julia's there. Good. Julie's one of our regulars, and someone else. That's fine. All right. So it looks quite good. They've got a good picture. Good picture of the statue of the Buddha in the picture, which looks great. So, Gabriella, she's online. Great. Right. So I've got three. So just there's a couple of handouts there. If you just get them on the table there. So hopefully people at home have also got the handouts. Actually sent 4 things to the people at home, which is one is the weekly, the overall, like they call it the outline, the whole 4 weeks.
Am I joined at the wrong, like in the middle or something?
No, we're right at the beginning of the module.
Oh, cool.
So just for people who are new, there are people who watch during the week too on sort of catch up. So Discovering Buddhism has 13 modules, 13 different subjects. And here we are at module, that's interesting, one says 5 and one says 9. I think it's module 9 actually. I'll check up. So one of my handouts says 5 and 9. So these different modules cover different areas. So we're sort of kind of in the middle of the course, but the course is designed to be able to be taught to people who've just started as well. Okay, because most of any Buddhist topic tends to connect up with other Buddhist topics, a bit like a circle. So wherever you start, you sort of end up covering some of the similar material. It's like one thing leads to another. So we're just focusing on this topic of Samsara and Nirvana for the next 4 weeks. And what we normally do for each week, always start off with 5 minutes meditation, which we'll do in a minute. Then we have probably talk for between 30 and 45 minutes, with questions are always welcome. And then I do a guided meditation at the end, about 15-20 minutes on a particular topic that relates somehow to the subject matter that we're teaching. So basically the handouts are the outline, which just gives you the 4 topics for the week there, happiness and suffering. It's basically the 4 noble truths, which is very basic Buddhist teaching. And we do each truth for each week, each of the 4 truths, one for each week. And today's like introduction and the first noble truth. And then I'll actually go through what's on the page in a minute. Second one is just a summary of what we're going to cover each week. So this one, just for today, it's actually quite a few pages. I've been making the weekly sort of summaries quite a bit more detailed since the coronavirus, because it's not having people live. There's no chance for questions and so on. So I've just made them a bit more detailed. And then the other one is the big bundle of materials, which is for the readings, and you haven't got that yet. So people who are at home, I've sent you the readings for this module. It's mostly extracts of teachings from the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa, and Lama Yeshe. So that bundle of things, I can either, if you want hard copies, Rain will run you off a copy now, or if you want to just wait and I'll email it to you when you get home, if you're just happy with a digital copy.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, right, I'll email it to you. I'll get your email address later. Okay, so that's, and then the last one is a really big bundle, which is actually a transcript of teaching from a monk called Venerable Tenzin Fedor, used to be a translator here at the centre. And it's what he taught when he taught this module, Discovering Buddhism. So it's basically a verbatim transcript. That's why it's quite long. So that's also, I'll email it to you.
Okay.
So it's quite detailed, and I think he taught the subject over 6 weeks. So it's a bit more detailed than me, because I'm teaching it over 4 weeks. All right, so there's more than enough material to read, and sometimes it might be a bit overwhelming, but just read what you can manage, and of course it's just there's actually a reading list too, some books. Maybe I think it's good to calm ourselves down. We might just start off now with mindfulness of breath. So 5 minutes breathing meditation before we start. So just comfortable, the main thing is to be comfortable. Sitting on a chair, on the floor, lying down if you're able to, like that. And basically what we're doing is just focusing on the breath, okay? So we're just giving our attention to the coming and going of the breath. So both feet on the floor if you're in the chair, and the hands can be just exactly the right hand and the left, usually with the thumbs touching, or on the knees, just on the thighs if that's more comfortable. Shoulders relaxed, eyes can be closed or just half open, just gently letting in some light. And we can, sometimes it helps to just take 2 slightly deeper breaths. All we're doing is just watching the breath, we're not changing the breath in any way. We can focus just on the movement of the whole body. We can focus on the abdomen, lower down, rising and falling, or on the nostrils where we can feel the air entering and leaving the body. Just the most comfortable, natural position to focus on the breath. Once we find that comfortable position, we just rest our mind there. Sometimes usually the mind will try and wander off, and when we do notice that, we just gently bring it back to the breath. And we also just, part of the mind just checking on what we're doing, whether we're still on the breath or not. Just monitoring the situation. just staying with the breath, full flow of the in-breath, full flow of the out-breath. Okay, and now we can just gently let go and relax. Come back into the room, back into the day world. We usually have a gong, but I can bring it this time. Okay. So we have 4 weeks to cover this topic. And just coming back now to that course outline. Basically, we're looking at the Four Noble Truths. Even though the topic's Samsara and Nirvana, the Four Noble Truths are teachings that actually explain Samsara and Nirvana is, and how to get to Nirvana, and why we actually are in samsara, a starting point, and how to get to Nirvana and what it is. So, as the sort of main readings are the course readings, which are the teachings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe. So that if you're new, Lama Zopa is the spiritual head of the organisation called FPMT, which runs the centre and many centres around the world. So, and his teacher was Lama Yeshe, who's since passed away, and they used to they actually started introducing Buddhism to the West in the 70s, they began by teaching in Nepal in a place called Kopan Monastery, and then gradually they started moving out and teaching in Western countries, Australia included. Australia was one of the first places where they started teaching, because we had many students from Australia in those days, mainly old hippies who'd going overland to India and Nepal. And so the whole organisation has just gradually grown with centres all around the world. And Lama Zopa is still teaching, and he's based in Nepal. Hasn't been able to travel. Usually he spends most of the year travelling to all the different centres, but hasn't been able to travel, of course, for the last year. So he's teaching online quite a lot. So the readings there. Then I've got another book called book called Practicing the Path. So people who've been doing the previous modules, I've mentioned this many times. That's a really good book by Yangtze Rinpoche. He's a Tibetan monk based in very high monk. Rinpoche means very high monk, and reincarnated from previous teacher, previous incarnation. And so he's put a book together of his teachings that over the years he's been giving on these topics in America. So Practicing the Path, and I've got a few spare copies at home. And I've actually, people coming to the centre, that's a good incentive. I give you a free copy. So, so that's a good book, very easy to read. Transcript of teachings there by Venerable Fedor, I've already mentioned, just on this particular topic. Fedor's a very good teacher, a German monk, been ordained for maybe about 20 or 30 years. It also comes with meditations that Fedor did when he taught the module some years ago, probably in another country. Then also on the list, if you've got, it's called Samsara, Nirvana, Samsara, Nirvana and Buddha Nature. So that's a very recent book, 2018, basically written by the Dalai Lama. His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Very detailed book. Probably it's written more at the kind of degree or even master's level, but I've just put it there if people want to go into more detail. I've taken a few extracts from it. Meaning of Life, that's a much smaller book by the Dalai Lama and Jeffrey Hopkins, translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. That goes back a long way. I haven't read it for a while, I've got it on my shelf, but I think that's more straightforward. The Wish of Filling Golden Sun, very old collection of Lama Zopa's teachings, and I think it's actually really hard to get nowadays. But this is the list that was given to us by the Education Department, the FPMT Education Department, who put the materials together. Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, that's a classic text by very high Lama Bhakti Bongka Rinpoche, who taught just before Tibet fell to the Chinese. He was one of the great teachers in the early part of the 20th century, and his teachings have been translated into that book called Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. Again, quite advanced, quite high level. So, and then there's lots more. If you Google the Four Noble Truths, you'll come up with all kinds of things, no doubt. So, but these are just sort of basic suggested readings if you want to go a bit further. So, so just coming to tonight, we're going to just look at, because I'm using some of the notes that Wai Chong used, because he taught this module. Wai Chong's our resident teacher here in the Vajrayana Institute, VR, and also Venerable Choki. He's not teaching the subject anymore, so I took over from him. So I've got a lot of his notes. So some of his notes, he always starts off with something very engaging. So he's looking at what is happiness and what is suffering, according to the Buddhist viewpoint, and also we can compare it to from the Western viewpoint as well. And then we just basically look at the outline of what the Four Noble Truths are, then which are, just in a nutshell, that we are in a state of suffering. So this is, it's basically telling us that things are not perfect, which we probably already worked out, but it's telling us, the degrees of imperfection, and then the second one is looking at the causes, why things could be better, and then third truth is that the causes, if you attack the causes of our suffering, we can end suffering. And how do you attack the causes? That's the fourth truth, and that's the path. What practices that we need to do, what steps we need to take. And basically, the answer is it's all with the suffering. The cause of suffering is in our minds, and the answer is also in our minds. The solution is in our minds, rather than being out there. The Buddhist approach is it's basically a mind problem. That's very roughly where the outline of the topic. So just the question, I've noticed if you ever watch His Holiness the Dalai Lama teaching, he's actually teaching a lot online at the moment. Usually the first thing he points out is how everybody wants suffering and doesn't want happiness. Sorry, everyone. Oh, what amazing. Everyone wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. Why I said that. So, so basically he just points out that we have this in common, that we're all in a state of wishing to have our lives better. Okay, nobody's wishing for sadness and unhappiness and so on. And so that's the way of this giving us some sense of equanimity. We're all are, as fellow human beings. We all have this common wish. Can't deny it. But we also have problems. That's undeniable as well, which we don't want. Okay, so that's then he goes usually develops that theme depending on what topic he's talking about. So just looking at the Buddhist, there's actually technically 4 different meanings of what happiness is in Buddhist teaching. The word for happiness, sukha, S-U-K-H-A in Sanskrit. So these 4 meanings include everyday meanings, like non-Buddhist meanings. The first one, our sense of when we're happy, when we've got some delicious food, beautiful music, sensory satisfaction, things that appeal to the senses. And so, although this is what is regarded as happiness in everyday life, and that we all want to have a good house, good job, high status, possibly, good holidays and so on, that from the Buddhist point of view, they say this is actually a suffering in disguise. And we'll come back to more detailed explanation of that. But that is not really, that's relying on external things, which can never actually provide lasting happiness. It's just temporary short-term process that eventually turns into suffering, called the suffering of change. So the other 2 are quite unusual, a little bit technical. Happiness of heavenly bliss. So in teachings on compassion and loving kindness, there's a sense of great mental calmness and bliss when the person is practicing compassion. So sometimes this kind of happiness is called heavenly bliss. People are very advanced in practicing compassion, loving kindness, definitely have a feeling of joy. So it's a great sort of incentive to practice compassion. The other one is when the mind is very calm. This is the meaning 3. Unified mind, when the mind can, the practice we did where we just did breathing meditation, very advanced practitioners can actually, over the years, develop, not necessarily years, but they can do it in a shorter time if they have perfect condition. They can develop the will to the ability to put their mind on one topic or one thing, one object of concentration for as long as they like. Okay? So that's great skill called samadhi, where the mind is very, very stable and pliant. The mind develops great agility and bliss. It's a great feeling of bliss when the mind can do that, not being distracted all the time. But the main one, the 4th meaning, is this feeling when we're liberated from all suffering. That's called Nirvana. So the awakened state, often called the awakened state. The Buddha was an awakened being because he'd left all suffering. And so that's really the traditional meaning of happiness in the bigger sense. He was teaching Nirvana, the end of the awakened state and the end of all suffering and its causes. And if it's perfect attainment of liberation, then we never go back. We never go back to suffering. Finish. So this is what the Buddha achieved under the Bodhi tree. He achieved perfect liberation, Nirvana, the ultimate kind of happiness. And so this is basically what we're being told is the best aim, aim the highest. But before that, we can obtain stages before we get to liberation. I mean, the Buddha didn't just become liberated by just practicing for one lifetime. He spent a whole lifetime. He's from birth as the king, the son of the prince, the son of the king, who's supposed to inherit the throne and become the king. But he displayed kind of dissatisfaction with the perfect life of being in a palace and all the sensory perfection. So he decided to escape the palace to see what was happening outside. And of course, his father didn't want him to do this because he'd see that things were not so good out there and he might get different ideas. So he went and he saw an old man, just for the first time, somebody who was aging, close to death. He saw somebody sick, suffering, and he saw other forms of suffering like animals and so on. So he saw the other side of existence, away from the perfections of the palace. And he decided he realised that actually his life he was going to start aging and get sick himself. So he wanted to be able to find out what the causes of this was, why everything seems to eventually die. So he spent the rest of his life, first of all, trying different things. He tried asceticism, where he didn't eat. He joined a group of people who were just really living an extremely austere life, almost starving themselves. He just, after several years, nearly dying, he decided that wasn't the way, he wasn't learning anything from that. And so he started to nourish his body and try different meditations and eventually attained enlightenment by sitting under the Bodhi tree in India and reaching a state of liberation. But according to the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, he didn't just do that in one lifetime. He spent the previous life, he lived as king, and he'd spent many lifetimes practicing all the mental development that was needed to become enlightened. It took many, many reincarnations of different forms, human and non-human, to develop the state of perfect liberation. So it's not going to happen slowly. So we're now in this perfect, very good situation, which is the human body. And so it allows us to actually use the human body with the human brain to develop the mind, to do the practices, the Buddhist practices that we have available to us. So this opportunity, just for this one lifetime, we're not sure whether we're going to be reborn as a human or what in the next lifetime. So we want to actually, as much as possible, avoid negative actions that are going to cause suffering, and as much as possible create positive actions that are going to cause happiness, positive results in the future, and ideally become be reincarnated. If we haven't become enlightened in this life, we're not lucky. It's quite difficult to become enlightened in this life. If we're not able to become enlightened and liberated in this life, we get reborn in conditions in the next life where we can practice more, we can receive the teaching, and develop more and more causes for enlightenment in the next life. So this bit long-winded version of the idea of ultimate happiness in the Buddhist teaching, but mostly the teachings of mental development and how to become happy is about suffering, because we have to actually, first of all, some people, if they walk into Buddhist teachings, they hear all this about suffering. It seems that the Buddhists are always talking about suffering, something that seems to be too much emphasized, some people might think. But the reason this is given a lot of focus is to help us realize our situation, and that also we can do something about it, okay? Particularly with this human body. We have the situation where we really, it's like deciding that you don't realize that you've got an illness. You haven't been getting regular checkups to the doctor, but suddenly you feel some sort of something wrong with the body, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor will diagnose something and give you medicine. He'll actually sort of tell you there is some sort of problem with the heart or some infection or whatever it is, and so it gives us the medicine. And of course, we have to take the medicine the next day. But until you get diagnosed, it's possible that we just oblivious. So this is why the first noble truth is to look very closely at our situation and look at the fact that actually we are in a state where we do suffer, and why we suffer. So as the quote there says, this is called samsara, and because we're not enlightened beings, we're not yet liberated enlightened beings, we're going to suffer. It's part of what that state is called samsara, and because it involves kind of repetition, we actually create the causes of more suffering, because we don't know. Like if you don't know that junk food's bad for you, you just keep eating it, and you don't realise that actually it's probably making you sicker and sicker and sicker. So if we don't realise that our mental habits, what we're doing, could be attachment, anger, greed, so on, then we don't understand what they're doing to it, and we don't even start to look for the remedy, medicine, make it better. So the most sort of common way of describing the first noble truth of suffering is called the three types of suffering. So the three types of suffering, the first one is the most obvious, the suffering of suffering. So this is where we've got we feel sick, we have it could be physical or mental. Now, obviously, physical suffering, we might have an accident, we might cut ourselves, we might lose a limb in a car accident, we might have mental anxiety situation where we have mental unrest, depression, and so on. It could be old age. As I get older, I feel that the body is changing, and of course, things are not working as well as they were when I was 20 years old. So this is another type of suffering of suffering. Very obviously, things just a physical or mental type of suffering that we all agree is that we don't want. So doesn't need a lot of elaboration, this type of suffering. And it also includes things like losing loved ones, and separation from what we like. You might suddenly, this coronavirus is a really good example of suffering of impermanence. Everything seems to be so good, particularly in Australia in our life, and then suddenly we have this life-threatening illness infecting the whole world. Buddha would have said, well, this is the suffering. It's being in samsara. You're a subject. Nothing is reliable in this particular realm. Everything's always subject to change. So as soon as you're born, your body starts to age. Everything that is born will eventually die. So all this is brought out very well in the Dalai Lama's, the extract from the readings. I think if you're just wondering where to start with the readings, the very first extract where the Dalai Lama covers the Four Noble Truths in, I think, about 4 pages. The Four Noble Truths. Yeah, it's literally 4 or 5 pages. Just read that maybe for a start. So he just particularly he says, he explains that, well, I'll go through it. So the first type of suffering is this physical one, which we all agree on. The second one is much more subtle, because it's actually saying that what we think, or we often look for as pleasant experience and happiness. So I've got good food, music, friends, beautiful, surrounded by beautiful things, the job we always wanted, the house we love, our partner. So if these things, which we strive to have in perfect or in the best form as we can, these are said to be actually unable to provide us with happiness. Maybe there's some happiness when we have the first taste of the chocolate cake or the ice cream, it is delicious. But what they say is, if there was something inherently happy or pleasant in that external thing, the more you ate it, the more you indulged in that experience, the happier you get. Well, it doesn't happen like that. It actually doesn't. We know that actually if we keep eating the chocolate cake, we finally get ill. So so this is the one that's probably needs lots of acceptance, lots of study, and actual practical. When things are going really well, just look at how we grasp and we want more of that. Okay, it's natural. It's natural. People want to have a good life. As His Holiness always says, people always want to be happy. But what they're saying here, the Buddha is saying here, is this is not going to actually provide lasting happiness. So this is just, when I mentioned the Buddha had this perfect life in the palace, and it was, he was in perfect health, he had everything he wanted. I think he had several wives, and everything physically was at his footstep. He was going to inherit the kingship, but interestingly, this didn't really interest him. And so this is the one that can be the most difficult to accept. But it's also, if you've had some difficult time, or even if you haven't, this is a personal anecdote. So I grew up in Sydney. Had probably very privileged background, lovely parents, good schooling, very nice place to grow up in Mosman. Now one of the best. Now it wasn't quite as posh as it is now, but so even though I had everything, and I got my degree at university, had a job, good job. I was really unhappy. I don't know why. It was just, as soon as I heard the Buddha's stories about Buddha being not happy with this perfect life, much better than I had, it sort of rang a bell that, and so I went to India and luckily stumbled across these incredible teachings that were being taught. So I went to India and luckily stumbled across these incredible teachings that were being taught in Kopan by Lamish and Lamza. But without that sort of feeling of discontent, I probably wouldn't have. If I'd just been completely sort of besotted by the worldly life in Sydney, I wouldn't have actually explored So that sense of, even though you've got all these number 2 types of suffering, which actually we thought were happiness, we weren't happy, so we wanted to. So I sort of wanted to. So we wanted to. So I sort of wanted to look beyond. So sometimes it can happen to if people have, a major trauma in their life and so on, they can start looking. And other times it's just some people from past contact with Buddha's teaching, as soon as they walk into a centre, I've just read a really interesting autobiography of a nun who, as soon as she walked into the Buddhist Centre, which was the Chenrezig Institute up in Queensland, there was some incredible peace in her mind. In just looking at people in rows, she said there was some amazing connection. She wanted to know more about the teachings. When she heard the teaching given by a Tibetan Lama, although she didn't understand at all, really, she said, there was some, just looking at the imagery in the Gompa, in the meditation room, was enough to make some connection. So this would be explained by her having some connection in a past life with Buddha's teaching. So it's quite a good example of karma and how karma can affect us from previous life. Okay, so so this is why sometimes we can feel very comfortable if we hear a Buddhist chant or maybe a mantra or something. There's something that it awakens from our very deepest part of our mind. According to Buddhist teachings, that we've had the mind is actually without beginning, and we've had many previous lives, and some of them could have been in human form, and we could have even had connections with Buddhist teachings in different places, different times, different places. So this third type of suffering, this is the one that is the cause of everything, suffering of conditioning, is called, that's the expression used by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. More commonly you'll find it described as all-pervasive suffering, all-pervasive, or compounded and pervasive suffering. So Lama Zopa says that the translation compounded or pervasive suffering, or compounded and pervasive suffering, is probably a more accurate translation. So, so this is telling us that even if we're just feeling neither happy nor sad, a neutral experience, we're actually in a suffering situation, because we're actually in what we call cyclic existence. Cyclic existence. This is what another way of saying Samsara is. So this cycle, the cyclic part of cyclic existence, is being reborn again and again. Okay, birth, old age, sickness, death, and then rebirth, old age, sickness, death. But this is what this type of suffering is, because we're subject to this uncontrolled sort of they call it the wheel of life, actually, which we'll talk about maybe in later weeks, where we're on this uncontrolled, unless we start to do something with our mind and exercise more control on it, we're just going to be creating the causes for rebirth, and not necessarily happy rebirth. There's all kinds of different realms that we can be born into, not necessarily perfect situation in Australia or in a human body. Could be born into animal realm, but there are other realms that are actually invisible that we can't see, that Buddha, highly realized beings can see, but we can't. So these are lower realms and upper realms. So so this type of suffering is really the cause of the other. Because we're in cyclic system, we have the old age, sickness, death, the first type of suffering, and we also have the suffering of, basically, I like to think of it as disappointment. We actually have the beautiful, we strive for the perfect house, and then we find that basically we need to renovate, or the car that we always wanted, and it's actually not quite as good as we expected. It's always something, some lack of satisfaction, something missing. It's the sort of feeling, it's mental. It's a mental thing. It's nothing inherently wrong with the actual object, but it's our sense of dissatisfaction. After we get what we want, we don't want it, or we want more. So this, what's the cause of this? What's the cause of it? So this is the causes in the mind, and ultimately said to be delusions and karma. You see this phrase, delusions and karma, the cause of all suffering. So the delusions are things like our tendency to grasp onto these, have experiences, which is fine. And the Buddhas and all these higher beings can have very much worldly enjoyment, but they're not grasping onto it. The thing is, we as unenlightened beings tend to expect too much, want too much, and this mental grasping is what causes us to suffer, because we can't sort of we try to hold on to something that is incapable of providing what we want. So, this is called ignorance, and basically not understanding how things exist. Okay, so why are we suffering from this anger and attachment? Basically, not seeing how things exist, things existing dependently. Nothing exists from its own side inherently. This is basically the teachings that are often called teachings on emptiness, the empty nature of existence. So we'll come back to those three types of suffering, but just a quote there from his Holiness. He says, so the Four Noble Truths are really the key to understanding all the Buddhist teachings. Just loosely quoting what I've got there on page 2. They describe the unawakened and the awakened experiences of this self, this thing we call me. Okay? And he calls it the merely designated self, because there's more teachings coming on about the nature of self. It's because we mistake how we exist, the nature of ourselves, that all these problems arise. It's a merely designated self. It's like a self that doesn't have any inherent existence. We don't realise that. We think there's a very concrete, important self here that has to be protected, has to be enjoyed, wants to only good experiences and no bad experiences. So I've just got a little bit more there about the Four Noble Truths. Why do they call it? Well, just maybe take the order that they're there. So basically, the Four Noble Truths. This is coming from the Dalai Lama. So basically, the Four Noble Truths. This is coming from the Dalai Lama's teaching, saying it's actually describing the Four Noble Truths describe what our unsatisfactory experience. Saying it's actually describing the Four Noble Truths describe what our unsatisfactory experience conditions are, the dukkha, and they present an alternative. Okay, you don't have to have all this. You've got the option of having something much better, Nirvana, and the causes of Nirvana, free of ignorance, and the causes of Nirvana, free of ignorance, and what they call afflictions, which are these, just states of mind that cause us unhappiness, and what they call afflictions, which are these, just states of mind that cause us unhappiness. So states of mind, often called, Lama Zopa calls it disturbing thoughts. I think that's a quite fairly accurate translation of these mental afflictions, mental afflictions. So basically they're telling us that the causes of our suffering is all within our own mind. Okay? We tend to always think it's something out there, that person who said something terrible, this sort of terrible coronavirus is causing us all these problems, but actually the ultimate cause of them is something in our own mind. So the first truth, it was the truth of suffering was the very first set of teachings that Buddha gave, when it's called the first turning of the wheel, which he gave at Varanasi, probably around about 500 BC. Varanasi, the place where Buddha gave the original Four Noble Truths, is still there. It's called Sarnath, and there's a big stupa there, just a ruin because it's so old, but very huge sort of ruin of the stupa where he actually gave the teachings. Lovely place. It's very calm. They have a deer park that's attached to that area. Where they still have deers there. Deers represent peace in Buddhist iconography. And so why they're called noble truths, because those who understand them and put them into practice and realize them in their mind are called Aryas. Aryas are those who actually have attained liberation. They put the teachings into practice to such an extent that they've realized Nirvana. They're in the state of Nirvana. They're called Arya beings. By practicing the teachings, the fourth note of truth, which is the path, the Dharma is often, it means that the actual teachings, by practicing and putting those into practice, they become Arya beings or liberated. They're true because they're non-deceptive, and they take us out of suffering. So these are just a few points. So, because the ultimate problem is this mistaken view of self, so the Dalai Lama gives a very brief teaching on what is this self. He says it's good to keep in mind these basic teachings on who we are when we're studying the Four Noble Truths, because basically while we're doing that, we're actually keeping in mind what the ultimate cause of our problems are, that we actually misjudge who we are. So he starts off saying that the non-Buddhists, which I guess includes Christians and so on, have this feeling, and also anyone, they could be Buddhists but they still haven't realized, they haven't understood the teachings on self, or you can intellectually understand the teachings on emptiness of self, which I might be slowly getting to self, but to actually embody them and to realize them is much more way beyond. I'm not anywhere near that yet. So he just points out that this includes Hindus. Remember, India was Hindu before Buddha arrived. They had many religions in India before Buddhism, and those religions, including Hinduism, believe in a soul called an Atman, which is indestructible, that takes rebirth, but it's indestructible. So it's very like the soul in Christianity in a way. It's like part of the self that can't be, is always unchangeable. So he says this is actually what we all, until we actually make progress in our practice, is that what we naturally think we are. And so he says that we all have the sense that I'm here, that I have a good day, I have a bad day, I feel hot, I feel cold. Okay, we all have this sense. And he says that what the mistake is, we put something behind. We definitely feel cold. Not denying that. So the Buddhist teaching said there is an I. It's definitely an I, but it's not the kind of I that we instinctively grasp at and think what we are. So he says the basis for believing there's a permanent self, and is that there is something that is definitely there. So the Buddhist viewpoint and all the different schools of Buddhism say there is no such permanent independent self. There's nothing that's not caused by something else. So the basic, this is the highest of the Buddhist teaching, is that the self is merely imputed. We have this collection of body, very much we've got a body, blood, bones, brain, and so on, and there's a mind. So one's physical, one's mental. That collection is what is the self. and we call that this is me. But he says basically before we start practicing, before we in any way start studying the teachings, we think that is more than what it is. We actually say, there's something different there. There's me who might be happy or sad over different days, sometimes I feel hot, sometimes I cold, but underneath is this very solid, unchanging me. But the Buddhists say actually that's not right. There's definitely the changing you, but there's nothing underneath. It's unchanging, permanent, nothing like that. So they disprove, they dispute this idea of Atman or soul. So this is what makes Buddhism quite unique, really. I think only Jainism is another religion that's similar to Buddhism. I think they agree with this. So definitely, is there a self? There's definitely a self, but it's, as Lama Zopa, just reading that quote there, halfway down page 3, he says, the reason we have created this samsara is because we have been following the ignorance of true existence, following the ignorance of the true existence of the I. The true existence means permanent, unchanging, and we cling to this I that is actually empty of true existence, as though it were truly existing. That is the whole mistake, the root of all our problems. Okay, so if you want to look further, it's page 25 of the readings where he expands on that. But that's sort of like the heart of the teaching on emptiness of self. We cling to this idea that there's something more there that's not there, and because it's not there, because it causes problems in our mind. The whole root of our problems. So is there a beginning? I'm taking all this from His Holiness's teachings from that book, Samsara and Nirvana. Is there a beginning? So basically, the answer in Buddhist philosophy, the mind is without beginning or end. So this mind is non-physical. So the body's physical, but we have a mind, and the mind is. The body has a beginning, of course, when we all conceive in our parents' mother's womb, and of course we know it has an end because it's going to die. But the Buddhist point of view is that the mind that is now residing in the body is actually without beginning or end. So this mind came from previous incarnations. Maybe we were a human before, maybe we were some other form, and we came into this body at the moment of conception of the two cells of our parent. And so each moment of mind is caused by previous moments of mind. We'll actually do a meditation on this maybe next week, just to sort of think of arguments as to why the mind must be without beginning and why it's going to be without end. There's good reasons, logical arguments for it. So there's no beginning for the continuity of mind, but the actual person who's in this body is just designated on. It's like a river. Actually, I think that's the best analogy. The river looks as though it's actually the same river that's going past. But if you analyse and think what is actually going past, every second, those molecules in the river of the water is actually changing. So all the mud and whatever it is that's flowing down is different from second by second. And so that's actually said to be similar to the stream of consciousness, the continuity of mind, the mind stream, where we have the mind is constantly active. You can see it when we do our breathing meditation, how the thoughts are coming and going, whizzing past. So this mind stream has no beginning and end, but we can put seeds on the mind. What we do think and say, our action, they put seeds or imprints on the mind. This is the idea of karma begins through imprints. So a positive action, generosity, compassion, loving kindness, that's going to actually put seeds, positive imprints that will bear positive fruit in the future. So negative actions, self-centeredness, killing other beings, all kinds of stealing, anger, and so on. These will put negative imprints on the mind. So this is a very sort of rough description of how karma works on the mind stream. So, so the mind is without, there's certainly no beginning on this imputed, this river of consciousness. There's nothing that we can pin down as unchanging, but there's this mind stream. Is there an end to self? The short answer in the Buddhist teachings, or the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, would say no, because even the Buddha's mind still exists after he becomes enlightened. That enlightened mind is unchanged, perfect mind. That Buddha mind continues on, and it may not have a human form. It might have different forms, or just what they call the Dharmakaya, the non-material form. That mind will continue. So there's this endless mind stream that is changing from moment to moment. Where the Buddha mind doesn't change from moment to moment, because he's taken out all the impurity, all the imprints, purified his mind completely. He is all in mind. Okay, so you can see the Four Noble Truths cover actually the whole of the Buddha's teachings in a way. So we just sort of touching on one of these points. But this idea of the changing self, the emptiness of self. There is a self, but it's not this concrete one. His Holiness said if we can keep this idea of doubting this presumption that we have, that there is something very definite, unchanging. If we keep that in mind, we can actually get much more out of the teachings. The teachings will mean much more for us when we're studying the Four Noble Truths. So that's why I said it's good to put that in before we actually go too deeply into the Four Noble Truths. Okay, I think talk myself stupid. So if anyone wants to say, we've got one real person here. See what Deborah's here. And if anyone out there wants to ask a question just by typing in the live chat, I can always mention that. I know it's difficult, but any questions, Deborah? Don't feel you have to have one. So it's already 5 past. So just a little bit more on the true sufferings. So we might have to come back and finish this off next week. So those three categories: suffering of suffering, which is the obvious one, old age, sickness, death, getting sick. Suffering of change, which is the changing sensory type of experiences, and the all-pervasive suffering, this idea of eternal rebirth. So that's the most usual way of describing truth of suffering. But there's these other categorizations. As you study Buddhism, you see this more and more. It's kind of like to put things in numbers. 4 types of noble truth, 3 types of suffering. So there's this other way of categorizing the different categories of suffering. Yangtze Rinpoche has in his book, and he says you can just take or leave these different ways of classifying suffering. Use the one that means the most to you. You don't have to sort of remember them all and become overwhelmed. So you can have a look at those categories, the 8 types of suffering on page 5. The first 4, birth, age and sickness and death, exactly what we covered in the first type of suffering that we looked at. So then another one, the suffering of separation, that because everything's impermanent, what we like, we have to part with. So our possessions that we love, our favourite flower or book or whatever will eventually age and change and not be what it was. And so we're separated from it. Same with friends. We often may have friends that we love, and some of them stay for our whole lives, and others we fall out of. We have some sort of, maybe nobody's fault, but we just drift apart because we both change. So we also encounter things we don't like. The person at work who annoys us so much and seems to be always making life difficult for us. Is that difficult thing, maybe something that always breaks down, the computer that always fails, and so on. So there are always these things happening that we don't want. We don't often get everything we want. We don't get the job. We may have the relationship, but it ends. We may have wealth, and then, of course, we lose it all in the stock market or something. So these, again, not being just suffering a change. So these different ways of suffering, there's another lot there, 6, which I probably won't go into because time's running out. So one good thing, interesting thing that His Holiness says in that first lot of teachings that I mentioned, I just reread it today before it came. So he said, if the mind that was not continuous, if actually all we had was this body and this mind, and as soon as this body dies, then the mind goes. He said, when you look at all these things ways that we suffer, you might think that, we just commit suicide and we've solved the problem because we don't have the body. It's this contaminated body causing all this. We just end the contaminated body and all our suffering in. So he actually says this. He's very honest. And then he said, well, that'd be one option if the mind didn't continue on. So people commit suicide almost certainly wouldn't have an understanding that whatever it is that they want to get away from is not going to end, because the mind will continue afterwards. The continuity of mind will continue. The body will end, continuity of mind. Each moment of mind causes the next moment of mind, and each moment of mind is caused by the previous moment of mind. Okay? So you have that with these imprints, like seeds on the mind stream, which are these karmic imprints. Okay, so the mind will continue with different karmic imprints. So that's some of the karmic imprints are positive, some are negative. So the mind stream will continue on with what we call these karmic seeds. So maybe the next life it might be, you might have created a lot of positive karma. You end your life, and then that might come to fruition. But you may also never quite know what karma is going to ripen at the time of death. The time of death is a very important time. So set certain karmic seeds. If you positive karmic seeds ripen, you go into a positive rebirth. If negative karmic seeds ripen at the time of death, you go into a less suffering rebirth. Okay, so this has just been completely logical, really, based on the teachings of continuity of mind. But I think because it can be overwhelming sometimes, all these different types of suffering, I thought a good meditation to end tonight would be appreciating our human life, because that other side of the thing is the way out. We've got the perfect means to start the road out of suffering by having a human body with a human brain. Unlike animals who can't really do much with their minds, we actually have now the opportunity to practice the Dharma. We've actually come in contact with the Dharma teaching, and so we've got what they call a perfect human body with a perfect human brain. We're actually born in a very favourable place, Australia, freedom of religion. We can practice anything, any religion. Buddhism has come to Australia only in the last 50 or so years, which is incredible. We have some leisure time. We don't spend our entire life working non-stop to stay alive, as many beings do in other places of the world. And we have interest. We have access to centres, Dharma teaching, and we have some interest. Our mind is some interest. We're not completely distracted by the worldly pleasure. We've got some interest in studying Dharma and work and training the mind. So that's what we do. We look at in this particular meditation, appreciating our human life. Quite one of the many Buddhist meditations that can do it. So that's basically what we do. We're going to spend the next 10 or 15, about 12, 15 minutes, just basically going through the good things that we've got in this life. Okay? And how, at the end of it, we also just note that it can all end at any moment, because we actually have a fragile body that can get sick and die unexpectedly, can have accidents and so on. So whatever it is, whatever time we've got left, we need to use it in the best possible way. That's this fundamental conclusion. Okay, so just get comfortable. Yes, do. Yeah, as many as you like. So cushions, lying down, sitting up, whatever is the most best way to have a comfortable mind, comfortable body, which means comfortable mind, can help to have a comfortable mind. So we begin now, just a few moments focusing on the breath. So we begin our practice, this meditation, appreciating our human life, by starting with this human body that we've got, with a human brain. This human body is intact, no major defects or illnesses. We have this incredible human brain that can think and reason, conceptualize. We can contrast, say, beings in the animal realm, like our pets, who have an animal body. They don't have a human brain. They could listen to the Buddha's teachings all day and not understand a word. They're unable to comprehend, favoured by ignorance, unintelligence. So, just appreciating the fact that we have this incredibly rare and precious human body. Not only the human body, but we have been born into a wealthy country, a safe country, free of civil war, free of political unrest. We have respect for human rights, freedom of religion, where we can practice what we please, what spiritual tradition we want to follow. have ample food and drink, necessities of life, food, shelter, clothing. No major natural disasters that will affect our livelihood. Not only that, but we have the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings existing in this country in a language we can understand. This is new, only in the last less than 50 years has this happened. We have qualified teachers, ordained Sangha, monks and nuns who spent their whole life studying Buddhist teaching, happy to teach the Dharma. We have these great beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, alive on this earth, an enlightened being who takes human form, teaching the Dharma, and helping beings in unbelievable, extensive ways. And we've got centres where teachings are available in multiple forms, online, live, so many different media formats. So we've got access to the Dharma, and we also have time. We have some leisure time. You don't have to devote our entire life to staying alive. To earning the means of livelihood. We have some leisure time. And finally, we have an interest in the Dharma. We have interest in looking at different spiritual traditions, cultivating our mind, finding practices that help the mind. And we have the seeds of compassion, wisdom, patience, loving kindness from previous good karma we've cultivated in this and previous life. So spending a few moments just rejoicing in our good fortune, our good situation, appreciating our human life. Also bearing in mind that these perfect conditions are temporary, they can change, the life will not continue forever. Death is certain, time of death is uncertain. What will help us, the only thing that can help us at that time of death, is our mind, our state of mind. Practicing the Dharma now, for this human body, will prepare the mind for the future. As much as possible, avoiding negative actions, and as much as possible, creating positive actions that body, speech, and mind. So the seeds of happiness in the future of this life and in the next life. making a decision to not waste this life, use our time wisely, make our life meaningful. So you can dedicate any positive merit you've accumulated from this practice, today's teaching, tonight's teaching, all the practices we've done in the past and will do in the future towards our development of on the path, graduated path to complete liberation, full enlightenment. As a fully enlightened being, we can be of maximum benefit to all others. And just special dedication from Love's Over for the coronavirus. His dedication is however many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed of all sickness. May all the sickness without exception of all transmigrating beings never occur again. May the Buddha Dharma last for a long time, and may all sentient beings in this world meet the Buddha Dharma and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. Dedicating to that. Thank you. So that's the end of the class. So I hope everything was okay. If you've got any burning questions, always maybe you can email me if you've got the email, or write something in the live chat. Hope to see you next week, same time. And if you can make it to the centre, you're very welcome to come. Otherwise, see you online next week. Okay, take care. Have a good week. Stay healthy. Bye.